Let's talk about writing a fantasy series part 2. A little disclaimer at the beginning of this video. This is less of a, these are the steps you must take to write a series, and more of a, what I'm learning, things I've picked up along the way, because I don't think I know everything. I think that's true for all my videos, but especially with writing a series, I feel like I am picking things up as I go and learning on the way. I just wanted to share with you guys 5 new things that I've picked up along the way as I've been writing this series and publishing. And yeah, I think it'll be really fun. If you missed the last video, I will link it below. I talked about, I think it was 4 different tips, things like character arcs and arcs for the series as a whole, outlining, story binders / story bibles, whatever you want to call them, that kind of good stuff. But in this video, I have 5 things that I want to talk about. Make sure you stay tuned until the end of this video, because I also have a little extra bonus tip to kind of follow up from what I've said in the last video and kind of give you an update on that. For anybody that's new here, I am writing a fantasy series. The first book is The Stolen Kingdom. It's an Aladdin retelling, and it's followed by The Genie Key, which is a Little Mermaid retelling. And I have 2 more in the series, The Cursed Hunter and The Enchanted Crown, that are not yet revealed, but they're coming out. These are both available to buy if you're interested. I'll leave the links below. But I just wanted to share these because the last time that I did a video on writing fantasy series, I hadn't even revealed the names yet, much less had them published. I want to start with something that I wish I would have included in my last video, but I didn't really fully understand it yet, and now I've gotten a much better grasp of it, and that is that there are really a few different kinds of series, and they're very different from each other. I briefly touched on this in my last video, but I didn't really fully understand it yet. And the most confusing thing, I think, is that they're called all different kinds of things. So it's like, which one are we talking about here? From what I can tell, there are basically 3 different types of series. And I'm sure there are probably some outliers, but these are kind of the 3 main ones that you'll see. The first one is kind of the standard when it comes to series, and it's usually what people mean when they're talking about a series. So it was actually kind of hard to find a specific name for it, because like I said, it's just kind of your generic series. But my favorite name that I found was the chronological series, because that describes it really well. You're going in chronological order, things are following a timeline, and they're also usually following a specific character or characters. So the essence of this kind of story is like a continual feeling, a continuing to follow those characters, a continuing to follow that timeline, and a continual to follow that journey, so to speak. So examples of this are like the Lunar Chronicles or The Lord of the Rings, or I just read the Shadow and Bone trilogy by Leigh Bardugo, where again it follows a specific character on a specific journey along a timeline. I hope that makes sense. It's the most common one because it's how we live our lives, you know, we're one person, we're a group of people, and we're going along a timeline like in order. So it makes sense that this is what we all typically jive with and we all like. By the way, a little side note, this kind of series that I just talked about is very common in fantasy and science fiction. I think that's kind of the main genre where we're used to seeing it, so maybe that's why I feel like it's a standard, and maybe it's not actually a standard. The next kind of series that you might see are connected standalones, and that's the best terminology that I could find for them. You'll find this a lot in like mystery genres like Sherlock Holmes, where each book is its own complete story, and maybe they go in order or maybe they don't. Maybe you don't have to read the other books around it. That's what it means kind of by standalone, but they're connected because usually they're still about the same character, and they're usually in the same world. In this kind of series, each book is like a complete story. You don't usually see cliffhangers, and they're all connected, but you don't necessarily have to read them in order or even read the other books at all. So essentially, you're going to have, like, for example, you'll see this a lot in like mystery books such as Sherlock Holmes. So you have like a detective or any character, and they're a little bit more static. Usually it's more about the story that's going on and the plot than is about a character arc and growth. So there are instances where you will see less character growth. Another good way to say it might be that it's about the adventure. Like, you're still gonna love the characters, and the reason that you want to keep seeing them in all these connected standalones is because you just love the characters, but they don't need to grow or do anything special. It's more about the adventure that they're going on. So you're going to see this a lot in, like, again, thriller, mystery, adventure type books. Like I said, an example of this is Sherlock Holmes or Nancy Drew or James Bond or Indiana Jones, like those kind of things where it's like as you guys know, if you've watched any of those movies or read any of those books, it's like the same character, but you don't necessarily have to watch it in order, and it's all fun on its own. I hope that makes sense. And then the third type of series that I see a lot is, it goes by a lot of different names. I see it most often called the saga or the anthology. This one is the hardest one for me to describe. This is so hard, but essentially I think the biggest difference, if you're comparing it to the other kinds of series, is that this kind of series doesn't necessarily have to follow the same characters. Like, it can be completely different characters. As you go through the series, it can follow a completely different character. Like, each book could be what they call a companion novel, and that's kind of where that subgenre or sub-series of companion novels comes in. Companion novels could be in the others. Each book is like its own story and it follows its own character, and the next book could be a totally different character. I think that's the thing that makes it stand out the most, is that it brings in this kind of like sub category in the series categories of companion novels. And so a companion novel, I think it could show up in the other kinds of series, but it definitely shows up most often in this kind of series. And the best way to describe it is basically, say you've got your main character in book 1 and then book 2 follows their companion. So it kind of makes sense. Like, it's not necessarily, and a companion novel could also be on the same timeline. It might show somebody else's story. My favorite example of this would probably be The Savior's Champion by Jenna Moreci, where it follows the guy in the first book, and then it shows the girl's perspective in the second book and all the things that we didn't know were going on. And it's the same timeline for the most part, but you're seeing completely different things. But a companion novel could also be something like you're following the best friend and you just go on a completely different journey with them, and it's like a new timeline and it's a continuing timeline. And you see this a lot in romance novels more than any other genre, I think, because you'll see, like, for example, I heard of a wedding series where you watch in the first book, you know, one couple gets married, and then in the next book the best friend finds somebody and they get married, and then in the next book the next friend in their group gets married and it follows their story. And so you're still in the same world. I think that's the biggest thing that is like the essence of this kind of series, is that the readers mainly want to just be in that world. They just want to be absorbed in that particular world, and they'll follow any characters and they'll follow any timeline. I think the reason it's called a saga sometimes is because it's like it's bigger than the characters, and I think it's that world that really ties the stories together. And again, the reason it's called the anthology is the same thing, because an anthology could be stories that aren't super connected, and yet they are, and usually that connection is the world. Good examples of this, like I said, are like romance series, like for example Kennedy Fox. I haven't read their books yet, but I see, like, just from looking at the covers you can see that it follows couples, but it's like, it seems like it's in the same world from the way they describe it. And then Jenna Moreci's series The Savior's Champion, and the sequel to that is like a companion novel, and so it's in that saga anthology kind of series. Another famous example might be The Chronicles of Narnia, where you start out following those 4 siblings, but later on you follow other children and they're still in the world, the Narnia world. I hope this makes sense to you guys. It's not an exclusive list by any means, because like I said, I'm learning. This is me sharing you what I've learned and what I've picked up. So these are the 3, or really 4, counting the companion novel, types of series that I've seen, and there's so much overlap between them. So don't freak out, just kind of get an idea of the essence of what you're going for. If you're wanting to focus on the world or a specific character and group of characters, or if you're wanting to focus more on the story. I think those are the kind of the 3 things that if you figure out which one is your main goal and your main focus, and you can also usually get an idea of which one's going to fit which genre, as I mentioned as well. Let me know in the comments if that helped you and if it made things a little bit clearer, hopefully, and if I missed anything. And give this video a thumbs up, by the way, if you're liking this kind of content. But we're gonna move on to the next thing that I wanna talk about, which is your ending. This one I wanna talk about specifically for books that have a sequel. I think after having just discussed the different types of series, that this particular thing that I've learned is going to apply mostly to the chronological series, the ones that your characters have an arc. It might apply to the other ones though. Let's kind of talk about it and see what we think. Endings are so tricky, because in a series you do want to have a cliffhanger. There is a reason to do that. It's quite simply to get the reader to buy the next book, okay? Let's be real. Like, I want the reader to buy the next book. I want you guys to read The Ginny Key. The Stolen Kingdom is not all there is to Ari's story. She has so much further to go. But I do have to say that it is a fine balance, because most people love the ending, but some people are like, what? You know, it's not resolved. And so let's talk about this. I'm gonna kind of oversimplify, and I don't think it's easy to do this, but I do think it's pretty simple to explain. I think that when you're starting a book, in your intro, in the setup and all that, you're introducing a problem that the character has. So I think personally that when you get to the end of the book, that problem, that specific problem, should be resolved. So Ari has a problem in the beginning of The Stolen Kingdom, and by the end of the book, it is resolved. There is resolution. I think it's really important to do that, or your readers are going to be so frustrated. They're gonna be like, nothing got fixed, nothing happened, and it's still this big open-ended thing. So I do think that your ending needs to have some resolution. However, I also think that when you're writing a series and you want them to keep going, you don't want it to be fully resolved. So the trick there is to introduce a new problem in the end. That's what I do. That's what I've heard advice about in the past. And so I don't know if everybody loves to read this, but I think it's just a smart technique for keeping the story interesting and making them want to keep reading, because the story's not done. You could choose what level of resolution you want to do. Like, you could almost fully resolve it, and the next problem you introduce is not that huge, or at least it doesn't seem huge yet until you get into the next book. And I think that if you're wanting to be traditionally published, that would be a wise move to do, because traditional publishers, from what I understand right now, don't really like sequels. So you want, if you're going that direction, to write something that is going to be resolved enough that the reader doesn't need another book. Like, maybe you hint at new problems and you just tease them a little bit, but you don't really like shove them in the reader's face. Or if you're like me and you're self-publishing and you know that you're gonna get the next book out pretty quickly, you can choose to do the more stereotypical ending, where you do introduce a new problem and you make it clear that it's a problem they're gonna have to face in the next book. So like I said, it's very simple to describe, not that easy to do, so good luck with that one, but that is how I like to do endings. The third thing I want to talk about is consistency versus surprises. I had a really hard time titling this one because it really is about like finding that balance between consistency but also surprising your readers. In my last video, I talked a lot about that consistency side with a story Bible, so you can keep track of what your characters look like and what the world looks like, and kind of keep that consistent so your readers aren't going, hold on, I'm pretty sure that he was not like that. And I think it's really important to stay consistent on that so that the readers don't get pulled out of the story when they're like, I don't think that's the way that it was before. So that is good, but you still need to find that balance and surprise your reader. And that is sort of what I'm figuring out lately, especially when I was editing The Ginny Key, because little personal story time here. When I first sent like the outline of The Ginny Key, which is book 2 in my series, to my critique partner, Brittany Wang, I remember the first thing that she said was, it looks like they're kind of going on the same journey as book 1. So that's too much consistency. Like, that's more along the lines of repetition and boring, honestly. So you want to be really careful that you're not taking your readers on the exact same journey, and that you're mixing it up and keeping it interesting. And so I think from what I have seen in my own writing, that this is a common problem, and I've seen it a little bit in other people's writing, but mostly my own, so maybe this is just me. But I found that it's very easy to fall into your favorite type of story to write and to accidentally kind of repeat the bones of it. Just letting you guys know this, if you're writing a sequel, it can be really hard to catch that you're doing that. So just kind of be aware and think, how can I bring something new to this story? I'm trying not to reveal too much, so I don't want to tell you like the endings of the stories, because if I do that, then it kind of ruins the books for you. But to give you a very, very tiny example, at the end of The Stolen Kingdom, there's a crowd. And at the end of The Ginny Key, there was also a crowd, kind of like that witnessing vibe. And so one of the things that Brittany pointed out that I could change, which was brilliant of her, by the way, was to try putting them in an intimate scene instead. So it's a very private moment, and it really changed completely how that scene played out. So that's just an example of how you can say, you can kind of catch yourself, and it's fine if your first draft is a little bit repetitive, but when you're editing, it's really good to catch yourself and be like, how can I make this different from the other books? Like, how can I make it its own thing. The next thing I want to touch on is creating a map for your world. And I say fantasy map because most often that's when you really don't know what your world looks like, but I actually think this could probably apply to all stories, because even if you just sketch something out, just like a little doodle just for yourself that no one else is gonna ever see, it can help so much. As soon as I made the map for my story, and I was struggling to figure out where they were going and what was happening, as soon as I drew a little doodle that's too embarrassing to even show you guys, I was having such an easier time figuring out where they needed to go, because I just needed to see it and kind of place them, like, where were they? I just want to emphasize that it does not have to be a professional map at all, and it can be something you never show to anybody. But I also do have a whole separate video. If you guys are interested, I'll link it below, on creating a fantasy map for your world. I have made 2 maps so far. This is the second one that I haven't really shown on camera before, but this is the map for my fantasy series. And so I had fun kind of playing with more fantasy elements here versus my more sci-fi map that I made last time. So if you guys are interested, I have a little tutorial of how I made that on my Instagram, on IGTV, but I also have a whole video on how to make a map for your world here on YouTube, so I'll link that below. Again, I'm including this tip because I found writing got so much easier as soon as I could visually see where the heck they were going and what was happening, what was around them, etc. The next tip I want to talk about is what I call my next level technique. This tip I think might be specific to the chronological type of series that we talked about at the beginning of this video. I don't know that it necessarily applies to the other types of series, so just putting that out there. But if you're writing a chronological series, I really think that this next level technique is super helpful for how I think about character arcs, because a character arc is such an ambiguous, like, wow, what is that? I don't really know. I kind of get it. It's like a McDonald's, but like only one. Anyway, it's just such an ambiguous, broad thing to me that it really helps me to think of like a video game. And so in video games, you've got your level, right? And I'm thinking like Mario right now, old school, what I used to play when I was a kid. But you have that first level and it's not too hard. And maybe in book 1, your character goes through, like, say, the first 5 levels. And so whatever they're learning, like, for example, they're learning acceptance to use some of the Save the Cat beats or whatever else they might be learning, right? If they're learning that particular thing, sometimes people, including myself, think that a series the next book has to be a new learning thing, all totally new. But often what I found that I really love the most and what works for my series is that they're at that initial level, and then book 2, it's the next level, so to speak. And you just keep taking them to the next level. So like with Ari, she has something she's learning. You think she's learned it by the end, but then that twist that we talked about takes her to the next level, and she realizes she really doesn't have it down at all, and she has to learn it all over again. Not all over again, but in a new, harder way in the next book. So I hope that makes sense. Just picture, again, like those games, especially the ones where it actually takes you physically, like, up a ladder and you move up. I don't even know if there's games like that out there anymore, but that's what I picture. I'm trying to think of an example because I know examples really help me, but I also don't want to ruin a book for you. So let's say, for example, in the Hunger Games. I'm pretty sure you guys have all read the Hunger Games, but if you haven't, you know, fast forward like 20 seconds or something, but you'll see that Katniss starts out kind of selfish and it's like just her family and that's all that matters. And then her world expands by the end, but it expands more and more with each book. So like book 2, it kind of expands to, I think book 2 is where it expands to that whole arena of all the different contestants, and she starts to care about them, and it kind of expands and like levels up, so to speak, in the second book. And then in the third book, she levels up to caring about like the whole world because she cares about the whole world and I don't want to ruin it. So I hope that makes sense as an example, where you'll see that it's technically she has the same problem, and then the author takes it to the next level and she keeps growing that character along the same arc. So it's little mini arcs, if you think of like the McDonald's, again, like the little arches, but it goes, you know, higher with each book and levels up. So I don't know. if there's any other way that I can say that. I hope that makes sense. As promised, I have a bonus update about how I drafted the whole series before editing, and was that a good idea? Did I actually do it? Did it work? So the first answer is no, I didn't fully do it. I should have, but I really wanted to publish book 1, and so I got into editing before I'd fully finished drafting. So I did draft almost the entire whole series. I still have probably 5,000 words left in the ending of book 4 that I have not written. I have it outlined, but I have no idea what it's gonna be. You guys have heard me talk about that before. I'm a little nervous about it, but I just haven't written it. I'm just a little bit scared actually to finish that, because what if it's crap? So I haven't touched it. I need to get on that. I'm going to do that soon. Maybe I've done it by the time this video comes out. But what I will say is that, to follow up on the last video where I said that I thought drafting a whole series before publishing and editing was good, I still think that's good. I still think that would be really good advice. I just didn't follow it. And so I have drafted the whole series, but I also edited and published book 1, and now I'm editing book 2 before technically I've wrapped up the very, very end of the series. So I think I'm not following my own advice, and I will say that I regret it. I'm just letting you guys know, total honesty moment. I really wish that I'd followed my own advice, because I intended to. My entire goal was to do it that way, where you draft the series first, then you go back to the beginning and you edit all the way through, and then I would go to publishing. I realized that it would take longer, and I think that's why I didn't stick to it, because I was too impatient. But I do think that it would make the series better, and above all, it would be way less stressful. By far. If you like this video and it helped you, give it a thumbs up so that I know that this kind of video helps you, and I maybe will make more videos on what I've learned about writing a fantasy series in the future, because I feel like I've got a lot left to learn. But definitely check out my books and the links below if you're curious and you want to read what they're like. In case you guys are curious, my series falls under the chronological type of series, where it's following a set group of characters along a set timeline in the same world. But there is a companion novel thrown in there with book 3, because it takes you into a separate, kind of like a behind the scenes for characters that you also need to know about, that will all come into play in book 4, and it's crucial to the story, and it's happening behind the scenes of book 1 and 2, and that's all I'm going to say about it. But that's why I've had to research and learn so much about the different kinds of series, and it'll be a really fun thing for you guys to check out in the future when that book is actually out, because I think it'll be a fun example of doing something really unique with the series. All right, that's all for today, guys. I hope you have an amazing day, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!